Good morning. Today is the 8th day of Nisan, the 16th of April, holiday for all those who have to send their returns into the IRS the day after. And we're up to the third reading of Parashat Metzora. And today we're going to look at the first verse of the reading, the third reading. And it says, basically we're dealing with what kind of offerings the person who was afflicted by tzarat has to bring in order to be healed and also purified. And so the Torah says, until now we've learned about the regular offerings, and now it starts and it says, if he is poor, or as we will see, impoverished. So if he is impoverished, the person who's coming to be healed and purified, and without sufficient means, then he takes one lamb as a guilt offering, and as a wave offering to effect atonement for him, 1/10 of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering, and a log, which is about 4 liters of oil for the purification rites that he's about to undergo. We're not going to go any further because there's a lot of detail, but we want to focus on today. This is a chance for us to understand this word impoverished. What does it mean if he is impoverished? So usually we associate poverty, being impoverished, with financial means, that the person doesn't have enough financial means. But what we're going to look at today is that there are actually 2 different explanations for what impoverished means. It can mean either someone who is indeed poor financially, or it can mean someone who is poor spiritually. And here by spiritual poverty, we mean someone who is sick, someone who is ill. And we'll talk about that in the second part of today's short class. I want to start with something that's a little bit different, doesn't seem to be related at first. Let me just mention that this is the first time that the word impoverished, Daled Lamed, appears in the Pentateuch. It appeared before, but with not as the proper noun. There were all kinds of words where it appeared in some kind of inflected form. But this is the first time it appears as the noun itself, an impoverished person, a dal. So what we want to talk about today is, first of all, a very surprising connection between this and Mashiach. And the reason there's a connection is because of a verse that becomes one of the important staples of what we mean by a Mashiach. So in Psalms 41:2, we find the verse, Ashrei Maskil Eldal, which means happy is the one who is thoughtful of the impoverished. In other words, to do away with poverty, be it that the person is financially poor or spiritually poor and ill, you need to be thoughtful. And the word for thoughtful here is a very special word. It's maskil. So let's see what this has to do with Mashiach. The reason we say it has to do with Mashiach is because, first of all, this word maskil is equal to Metzora. It's the same value as someone who is inflicted with tzarat. And there's a very interesting thing that the sages say in Sanhedrin 98b, that the Mashiach is designated as the Metzora of the house of Rebbe. Chivara de Bei Rebbe. Chivara is a Metzora, is a person who's inflicted with whiteness. He's inflicted with this disease called tzarat. And on the one hand, he is inflicted with tzarat. On the other hand, like we said, maskil is the opposite of that. To be one who is thoughtful, who has intellect, is to be the opposite, as it were. It has the same value, but here it's like Mashiach and Nachash, like the Mashiach and the serpent. They have the same value, 358. In this case, the 2 values are Metzora, the person who's afflicted with tzarat, and the maskil, which is a description of Mashiach. Where is this a description of Mashiach? It's in a very famous verse in Isaiah 52:13. Behold, my servant shall prosper. There it says, Hinei yaskil. He will be a maskil. To be thoughtful is also to be successful in thought. It's not just to be thoughtful like anybody else. It's to have thought that has success. That's why a lot of times in Kabbalistic folklore, the Mashiach will be connected with a revelation of Elijah the prophet. When people say, I had a revelation of Elijah the prophet, it sounds very mystical, very high. Really what it means is that I had sudden intellectual prosperity, sudden intellectual wealth, that there was something I couldn't have come to, but I came to. So my servant shall prosper, be exalted and raised and elevated very much. And this verse from Isaiah 52:13 again connects the Mashiach as someone who's a maskil, someone who prospers in his intellect. And why does he prosper in his intellect? What is so important about this prosperity in his intellect, this success in his intellect? Because he's maskil eldal. He's the one who comes to relieve the poverty, whether it be the poverty, the physical, material poverty, or it be illness and sickness and spiritual poverty. So let's see what we can get out of this, and this is very interesting. There are actually 5 different interpretations of what it means to be thoughtful, to have spiritual thought about someone who is poor. The simplest example is that to have thoughts about the impoverished people is to have an anticipation of acting compassionately with them. To be compassionate, just to be compassionate. That's the simplest type of maskil. It's the simplest type of intellectual act that a person can do when thinking about the impoverished. The second one is a little bit more than that. It's saying, when I do give charity to someone who needs it, I want them not only to receive it, but not to be embarrassed when they receive it. So I don't just want to be compassionate, I also want to do it in such a way that it will prevent the person from being embarrassed. And there's many stories in the Talmud of people, sages, who literally almost gave their lives so that the person would not be embarrassed when taking a donation, when taking charity from them. The third explanation is higher even. It says there's thoughtfulness, which means that if I consider my impoverished neighbor, if I think about somebody who has an impoverished life physically, has little material goods, has a difficult physical life, I will see that his life is full of God's providence. That's what it means to be maskil el-dal. It's almost like the Mashiach, this person who has this, or any one of us, the messianic spark inside each one of us, is that I look at someone who's impoverished and I get to know them well enough that I see the hand of God in their lives. And this is a very interesting thing, because it doesn't say that you can do this with someone who's wealthy. Meaning the people who are wealthy, the wealth tends to mask the divine providence in the person's life. And we learn this from the continuation of Maskil el-Dal, of being thoughtful about the impoverished, because the continuation of the verse in Psalms 41 is, on a bad day, God will keep him from harm. Meaning that there's an ability to see how God is protecting him. So all these have to do with understanding impoverished as someone who simply does not have material wealth. But now let's look at someone who is ill. Why do we say that someone who is ill would be impoverished? So the simple explanation given in all the Kabbalah is that when you take the word for ill, choleh, you see that its gematria, its value is 49. And the understanding is that it's one less than 50, meaning that it's missing what we call the 50th gate of understanding. The understanding has 50 gates, and when you only have 49, you're missing one. The one is something that comes from above. It's something that you can't really take yourself. And the way it's explained in Hasidic thought is that you can only acquire this one last 50th gate if you have self-negation, if you self-nullify, and then you receive it from above. The same idea is in Shavuot. in the day that we mark the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai, which is the 50th day of the counting of the Omer, but we don't count that day because we say we count 49 days, and then God, as it were, counts the 50th day, so it's coming from above. Now, when we think about impoverished as somebody who lacks spiritual understanding, and we think about everything we've talked about tzarat, we see that this is exactly what it means to have tzarat. Tzarat, we said, is a person who only has understanding but is missing wisdom. And wisdom is always that self-negation, is that self-nullification. So they have 49 even gates of understanding, and usually they do, meaning it's a person who is at the peak of development, but something is missing. And despite the fact that they've acquired so much Torah, they've acquired so much standing, they're still missing their ability to nullify before God. And that is what causes the malady, the tzarat. Tzarat, we've said this before, is the Torah's archetypal malady. There's no other discussion of any sickness, of any disease in the Torah that goes in depth into how it is diagnosed and how it is healed. There's nothing else except for tzarat. So, what does it mean to be thoughtful of the person who's ill? So, if I'm a doctor, it means to be thoughtful, to be thinking and diagnosing his illness and trying to give him something that will help. But if I'm not a doctor, how do I give someone that gate, that last gate, which is really the negation, which is really that ability to self-nullify? Well, it's more difficult. It's much more difficult. It's not just giving them emotional sympathy. This is what the Arizal explains as the mitzvah. It's the essence of the mitzvah that we call visiting the sick, bikur cholim. So it's not just having compassion on them, but giving them something. It's a lot harder. A lot more thought needs to go into it. It's being able to give them some sudden inspiration that will help them gain this 50th gate. And that is much more difficult. But there's another meaning to it. So that's our fourth meaning of what it means to be thoughtful. It's to be thinking about the point of wisdom that's missing in the person. But the fifth explanation is taking this concept of visiting the ill a little bit differently, because the word is bikul. Bikul also means an in-depth review. Sometimes you could translate it as criticism, but it's really a deep review of the situation. And here it's much more difficult. It's not just inspiration, it's being able, like a physician. When someone's sick, they go to a physician, they say, I must have done something wrong. What did I do wrong? What do I need to balance myself again? What do I need in order to be well again? So you go to a physician, they usually, hopefully, will give you some kind of medicine, something physical. But there's also a Rebbe. A Rebbe is a spiritual physician. And when a person goes to a Rebbe, he's not looking for the physical root of his disease, he's rather looking for the spiritual root of his disease. So for the Rebbe to think about what is needed for this person, what he really needs in order to heal, that is the fifth form of thoughtfulness that goes into the impoverished of someone who's ill. Now, I'll just take one more minute to put this in this whole structure, these five different interpretations, into a structure. Really, the first three, when we said the impoverished of someone who's ill, that is looking at the impoverished as the sphere of kingdom, malchus. About malchus, it says it's poor; it has nothing of its own. Who is having compassion on it? Who is, like we said, compassion, making sure it's not embarrassed, and even more than that. Not only is it giving compassion and making sure that the person is not embarrassed, but we also said that it means to see the divine providence in their lives. Those three things are done by beauty, by tiferet. And if we look at God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the four-letter name, then beauty is is Vav, and kingdom is the last Hey. So it's Hey looking at the Vav. That's the thoughtfulness of the Vav. I said that backwards. The Vav looking at the Hey. The thoughtfulness in the Vav, in beauty, in Tiferet, which is giving to kingdom. The second two explanations we gave that have to do with being thoughtful of the impoverished as someone who's ill, who's missing something spiritual, that is the top unification in God's name, the Yud and Hey. The Yud is wisdom and the Hey is understanding. And like we said, what's missing is the 50th gate. It's what wisdom is going to give to understanding. So we said here we have two different explanations. The one is giving wisdom as an inspiration. It's a positive thing. And the other one is the wisdom looking at understanding, like the Rebbe looking at someone coming to him and seeing what the spiritual root of their problem really is and being able to give them a remedy based on that. So this was all a deep meditation on just first verse, what it means, why the Metzora, the person who's afflicted with Sarat, is sometimes described as a dal, someone who is impoverished. And thank you very much for joining. Hope to see you tomorrow.